The air in the Portland International Airport was a sterile, recycled breath, tasting of jet fuel and impatience. Liam stood near the baggage claim carousel, a solitary figure amidst the chaotic reunion of families and lovers. In his hand, he held a single desert marigold, its vibrant yellow-orange petals a stark, living protest against the terminal's muted gray tones. He had carried it all the way from Phoenix, a fragile piece of the sun-drenched world he was so eager to share. For 2 years, his world had revolved around a woman who lived in the gentle, misty light of the Pacific Northwest, a woman he knew as Serafina. He had memorized the curve of her smile, the way her eyes crinkled in the hundreds of photos she'd sent, the cadence of her voice from thousands of hours of phone calls. And now, after 730 days of digital intimacy, he was about to hold her hand, to breathe in her scent, to confirm that the soul he had fallen in love with had the physical form he had come to adore. He checked his phone again. Her flight had landed 20 minutes ago. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and a faint, unnameable anxiety. He scanned the river of faces flowing past him, searching for the one he knew better than his own. He was looking for the sun-kissed skin, the athletic build honed by years of running on coastal trails, the long, dark hair that she said smelled of salt and rain. He imagined the moment 100 times. Her eyes would find his, a slow smile of recognition would spread across her face, and she would close the distance between them in a few graceful strides. The digital dream would finally, blessedly, become real. Then he heard a sound that didn't fit the picture. A soft, electric whirring, cutting through the din of rolling suitcases and echoing announcements. The sound grew closer, insistent. He glanced down and saw a motorized wheelchair navigating the crowd, its occupant steering with a careful, deliberate touch. His eyes flickered over her for a moment, a passing observation of a stranger, before returning to his scan of the crowd. But the whirring stopped right beside him. He felt a presence, a stillness in his periphery. He turned his head. The woman in the wheelchair was looking up at him. Her face was pale and drawn, framed by thin, lank hair. Her body, wrapped in a loose-fitting sweater, seemed impossibly frail, her hands resting in her lap like sleeping birds. There was a profound weariness in her eyes, but beneath it, a terrifying spark of recognition. He did not know this woman. He could not know her. And yet, she was looking at him as if she had been searching for him her entire life. A knot of cold confusion tightened in his stomach. He offered a hesitant, polite smile, the kind you give a stranger who has mistaken you for someone else. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice a fragile whisper he almost didn't catch. But he did. He heard it, and the sound was a key turning a lock deep inside his memory. It was a voice he knew intimately, a voice that had whispered him to sleep, that had shared secrets in the dead of night, that had promised him a future. It was Serafina's voice. "Liam?" she asked. The world tilted on its axis. The fluorescent lights of the terminal seemed to flicker and dim. The cheerful chatter of reunions faded into a dull, roaring static. He looked from her face, this stranger's face, down to the desert marigold in his hand. The flower, once a symbol of hope and connection, now felt like a prop from a cruel play he hadn't known he was acting in. His fingers went slack. The marigold slipped, tumbling through the air in a slow, silent arc before landing on the polished floor between them. A single, perfect splash of color in a world that had just been drained of all of it. He stared at the fallen flower, then back at the woman in the wheelchair. The question was a choked, ragged thing in his throat, a sound of pure disbelief. "Who are you?" Her eyes filled with tears that did not fall, and in that moment of shattered illusion, Liam felt the crushing weight of a love story that had never truly begun, and a betrayal so profound it felt like the end of the world. 2 years earlier, Liam's world was one of quiet order and contained beauty. As a landscape architect in Phoenix, he spent his days coaxing life from the unforgiving desert soil, designing oases of green and shade amidst the baked earth and relentless sun. He understood the language of resilience, the subtle ways a Palo Verde tree would bend but not break, the patient unfolding of a cactus flower after a rare rain. His work was his solace, a tangible connection to something real and enduring. He created spaces where others could find peace, yet his own internal landscape was arid and lonely. He lived in a small, minimalist bungalow with clean lines and large windows that looked out onto a garden of his own design, a meticulously curated collection of native plants that thrived in the harshest conditions. It was beautiful, controlled, and silent. His last serious relationship had ended 3 years prior, a slow, painful erosion of trust that had left him wary of vulnerability. He had poured himself into a woman who saw his quiet nature not as depth, but as a void she needed to fill with her own noise. When she left, the silence she'd once complained of rushed back in, but it was different now. It was heavier, laced with a sense of personal failure. He had tried the dating apps, swiping through a sea of curated profiles that felt as artificial as plastic turf. The brief, stilted conversations, the pressure to perform an idealized version of himself. It all felt exhausting, a betrayal of the authenticity he craved. So he retreated. His life narrowed to the predictable rhythm of work, the gym, and quiet evenings at home. He was not unhappy, not exactly, but a persistent, low-grade ache of loneliness hummed just beneath the surface of his well-ordered days. It was on one of those quiet evenings, with the desert sky outside his window bleeding from fiery orange to deep indigo, that he first found her. He was scrolling aimlessly through his phone, a passive tourist in the vibrant, noisy lives of strangers. His thumb flicked past fitness models with impossible physiques, travel bloggers in exotic locales, and lifestyle gurus preaching manufactured positivity. It was all a blur of the same polished unreality. And then he stopped. The profile was named Serafina Sunrise. The first picture he saw was of a woman's silhouette against a dawn-streaked sky, her arms raised in a triumphant stretch atop a coastal cliff. There was an energy to the image, a sense of unbridled vitality that felt like a cool drink of water in his own dry existence. He tapped on the profile. It was a world of breathtaking beauty and inspirational strength. There were photos of her running on misty beaches, the waves chasing her heels. Videos of her lifting weights in a sunlit gym, her muscles taut, her expression one of fierce determination. Pictures of vibrant, healthy meals she'd prepared, and candid shots of her laughing with friends, their faces artfully blurred. Her captions were not just empty platitudes. They were thoughtful reflections on discipline, on overcoming self-doubt, on finding beauty in the struggle. She wrote about pushing through a grueling workout, about the mental clarity that came after a long run, about the simple joy of watching the sunrise. She was a vision of health, discipline, and radiant positivity. She lived in a small town on the Oregon coast, a place of dramatic cliffs and evergreen forests that seemed a universe away from his own world of rock and sand. Liam found himself utterly captivated. It wasn't just her physical beauty, though she was undeniably stunning. It was the entire narrative she presented. She seemed to embody a kind of resilience he deeply admired, a strength that felt earned, not given. She was his opposite. Where he was contemplative and grounded, she was dynamic and aspirational. Where his world was defined by the heat of the desert, hers was one of cool mists and wild oceans. He spent over an hour that first night, scrolling back through months, then years of her life, piecing together the story she was telling the world. He felt a strange sense of kinship with this woman he had never met, a pull toward the light and energy she radiated. He felt, for the first time in a very long time, a flicker of hope. He was a man who built gardens in the desert, and in Serafina, he saw a rare and beautiful flower he desperately wanted to know. The act of reaching out felt momentous, a small step out of the comfortable fortress of his solitude. He composed and deleted the message a dozen times, worrying it was too forward, too simple, too much. In the end, he settled on something direct and genuine, commenting on a recent post she'd made about the mental fortitude required for long-distance running. He wrote, "Your posts are about more than just fitness. There's a philosophy in them about resilience that really resonates. Thank you for sharing that." He hit send, his heart thudding, and immediately felt a wave of self-consciousness. She had tens of thousands of followers. His message was just a single drop in an ocean of digital admiration. He put his phone down, convinced he would never hear back, and tried to forget about it. 2 days later, his phone buzzed with a notification, a direct message from Serafina_Sunrise. His breath caught in his throat. It was short, but it was warm. "Thank you, Liam. That means a lot. It's the philosophy that keeps me going on the hard days." He read the words over and over, a giddy, unfamiliar lightness spreading through his chest. He replied, and she replied back. And just like that, a fragile thread of connection was spun across the 1,000 miles that separated Phoenix from the Oregon coast. Their initial messages were tentative explorations of common ground. They talked about their work, his shaping of the earth, her shaping of the body. He found her intelligent and surprisingly witty, her online persona of pure inspiration deepening into a more complex, engaging personality. The conversations quickly migrated from Instagram DMs to text messages, and the frequency intensified. They began to share the small details of their days. He would send her pictures of a newly blossomed cactus flower from his garden. She would send him a photo of the dramatic, moody ocean under a stormy sky. Their communication became the scaffolding of his daily routine. He woke up to a good morning text from her and fell asleep after a long exchange of good nights. The silence in his house no longer felt heavy. It felt expectant, filled with the potential of her next message. Then came the first phone call. He was nervous, his palms sweating as he dialed the number she'd given him. He worried the chemistry they had in writing wouldn't translate, that the reality of her voice would shatter the perfect image he had constructed. But when she answered, her voice was exactly as he had imagined it might be, warm, melodic, with a hint of laughter just beneath the surface. That first call lasted for 4 hours. They talked until the desert moon was high in the sky and the city lights of Portland were beginning to dim. He told her about his childhood in Arizona, about his passion for botany, about the failed relationship that had left him so guarded. He spoke with an honesty he hadn't accessed in years, the words flowing out of him as if a dam had broken. She, in turn, painted a vivid picture of her life. She was Clara, she told him. Serafina was a name she'd adopted for her brand. She spoke of a demanding schedule of early morning clients, of developing fitness plans and nutritional guides. She described her small cottage near the ocean, the sound of the waves a constant companion. She told him about her own past heartbreaks, her own struggles with self-worth that had led her to fitness as a form of salvation. She was vulnerable, open, and deeply relatable. Liam felt an overwhelming sense of being seen, of being understood by someone who seemed to share his own deep-seated desire for a meaningful connection. He was falling in love, not just with the pictures on a screen, but with the woman on the other end of the line, the woman whose thoughts and fears and dreams were beginning to intertwine with his own. There were, however, small, peculiar boundaries she maintained. Whenever he suggested a video call, there was always a plausible excuse. "My laptop camera is broken. I've been meaning to get it fixed," she'd say one week. "The reception is terrible out here by the coast. The video would be a nightmare," she'd insist another. Once, she claimed she was just feeling self-conscious, that she'd had a long day and didn't feel camera-ready. Coming from a woman who posted dozens of seemingly perfect photos of herself, it felt odd, but he accepted it. He reasoned that perhaps the public photos were her professional armor, and in their private space, she felt free to be less than perfect. He didn't want to push, didn't want to seem demanding. He trusted her. The emotional intimacy they were building felt so profound, so real, that the absence of a moving image seemed like a trivial detail. He was in love with her soul, he told himself, and that was what mattered. He was building a future with her in his mind, a beautiful garden where their two worlds could finally meet, and he was blind to the fact that he was building it on foundation of sand. The first voice of doubt came not from within, but from his sister, Sarah. She was a no-nonsense ER nurse, a woman trained to assess situations quickly and spot discrepancies. She was 3 years older than Liam, fiercely protective, and had been his anchor since their parents had passed away a decade earlier. They met for their weekly dinner at a small Mexican restaurant. the air thick with the smell of sizzling fajitas and lime. Liam had been talking about Clara for months, his descriptions growing more effusive, more certain. He was showing Sarah a new picture Clara had sent him. A stunning shot of her on a hiking trail, emerald green forest canopying above her. Sarah studied the photo, her expression unreadable. "She's beautiful, Liam. She always is." She put the phone down on the table. "But it's been over a year. Don't you think it's a little strange that you've never once seen her in real time? Not once on FaceTime or Skype?" Liam's good mood instantly soured. He felt a familiar defensiveness rise in him. "We've talked about this, Sarah. Her camera is broken, and she's shy in a way. The pictures are for her work. It's different." "Shy?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "She has 50,000 followers. She posts videos of herself working out. That doesn't sound shy to me. It sounds like a contradiction." "It's not a contradiction," he insisted, his voice a little too sharp. "You don't know her. The person on the phone is not the same as the brand online. The brand is a performance. With me, she can just be herself." "And what self is that, exactly? The one you hear or the one you see?" Because they've never been in the same place at the same time, her questions were like surgical probes, precise and uncomfortable. "Have you ever spoken to any of her friends? Has she ever mentioned you to her family? Her parents live in Florida. She's not close with them, and she keeps her professional life separate." I get it, he was making excuses, and he knew it, but the alternative, that Sarah was right, that something was fundamentally wrong, was too terrifying to contemplate. To admit doubt would be to risk the entire, beautiful edifice he had so carefully constructed in his heart. It would mean admitting the loneliness might come rushing back in. So he pushed back. "You're just cynical because of your job. You see the worst in people all day long. This is different. This is real." The conversation created a small but palpable fracture in his relationship with his sister. He started sharing less, becoming more guarded about his conversations with Clara, shielding their perfect digital world from Sarah's pragmatic skepticism. But her words had planted a seed of unease. He started noticing things he had previously dismissed. Tiny inconsistencies in Clara's stories. One week, she talked about a childhood family trip to the Grand Canyon, describing the awe she felt. A month later, when he mentioned wanting to take her there, she said, "Oh, I've always dreamed of going. I've never seen it." When he gently pointed out the contradiction, she laughed it off. "Oh my God, my brain is mush. I must have been thinking of a documentary I saw. You know how it is, he did know. Or he wanted to." There were also moments of profound, inexplicable sadness that would seep into her voice. In the middle of a cheerful conversation, her tone would suddenly flatten, her energy dissipating like mist. She would become quiet, distant. When he would ask what was wrong, she would blame it on stress, a difficult client, or just fatigue from an early morning. "I'm fine," she'd say, her voice lacking all conviction. "Just tired. Tell me something good about your day." He interpreted these moments as signs of her depth, of a hidden melancholy that made her all the more compelling. He saw it as proof of the trust she placed in him, allowing him glimpses of the vulnerability behind her strong public facade. He never considered that the sadness might be her reality, and the happiness, the performance. The dramatic irony was a chasm widening between them, and only one of them was aware of the fall to come. He was in love with a woman fighting demons he couldn't see, because he was too busy admiring the angel she pretended to be. In a small, second-floor apartment in a dreary suburb of Portland, a world away from the sun-drenched cliffs of her digital avatar, Clara lived a life of quiet desperation. The air in her apartment was thick with the scent of lavender oil and sterile antiseptic wipes. The blinds were usually drawn, casting the cluttered living room in a perpetual twilight. Her world had shrunk to the size of these few rooms, its geography defined by the distance between her bed, her armchair, and the bathroom. Clara had a severe, degenerative autoimmune disease that had declared war on her body a decade ago. It was a cruel, invisible tormentor, causing chronic, debilitating pain in her joints, profound fatigue that felt like being drugged, and a host of other unpredictable and humiliating symptoms. Her reality was a landscape of doctor's appointments, prescription bottles, and days lost to a fog of pain and exhaustion. The motorized wheelchair, which she hated with a passion, was her reluctant partner, granting her a small measure of mobility within her home and for the rare, necessary trips outside. She was a prisoner in her own body. The vibrant, athletic woman known as Serafina did not exist. She was a ghost, a fantasy woven from stolen pictures and desperate longing. The photos belonged to a distant cousin in Australia, a woman Clara hadn't spoken to in years, who had a public but not famous social media presence. Years ago, in a moment of deep despair, Clara had saved a few of her cousin's photos, marveling at the life she led, the effortless freedom of her body. The Serafina_Sunrise profile began as a private escape, a digital vision board. She created the account with no intention of interacting with anyone. It was a place to collect images of health, strength, and beauty. All the things she felt had been stolen from her. She would write captions for the photos, imagining the life that went with them. She wrote about the feeling of the cold ocean water on her skin, the burn in her muscles after a long run, the taste of a healthy meal she could no longer digest properly. It was a form of therapy, a way to inhabit a world where she was not defined by her illness. Then people started following the account. Her evocative writing and the stunning images drew an audience. They left comments praising her dedication, her inspiration. For the first time in years, Clara felt seen. Not as a patient, not as a burden, but as someone strong and admirable. The validation was a powerful, addictive drug. The lie grew, taking on a life of its own. She began to embellish, creating a backstory, a career, a whole fictional existence. She researched fitness and nutrition obsessively, becoming an expert in a field she could never physically participate in. She was a brilliant architect of a life she couldn't live. And then Liam messaged her. His first message was different from the usual fawning comments. It was thoughtful, intelligent. He saw the philosophy behind the facade. He saw, ironically, a part of her true self. The writer, the thinker, the resilient soul trapped inside the failing body. She hadn't intended to reply, but she was so terribly lonely. The conversation with him became the brightest spot in her bleak existence. He was kind, gentle, and intelligent, and he was interested in her mind. With him, over the phone, she could be the person she was on the inside. She could be witty and insightful and loving, without the constant, humiliating static of her physical reality. She fell in love with him, too. It was a strange, fractured kind of love, directed at a man who was in love with a phantom. The guilt was a constant, gnawing presence. Every lie she told, every fabricated story about her day, felt like a small tear in her own soul. But the fear of telling him the truth was even greater. She had seen the flicker of pity in people's eyes her whole adult life. She had seen friends and partners drift away, unable to cope with the relentless demands of her illness. She believed, with absolute certainty, that if Liam knew the truth, he would leave. He had fallen for Serafina, the embodiment of vitality. How could he ever love Clara, the embodiment of sickness and decay? And so she kept the lie going, pushing the inevitable day of reckoning further and further away, choosing the sweet poison of a borrowed present over the bitter medicine of a truthful future. After 2 years, the digital courtship had reached its limit. For Liam, the love he felt was no longer something that could be contained within the confines of a phone. It was a living, breathing thing that demanded proximity, touch, a shared physical space. The distance, once a romantic obstacle to be overcome, had become an unbearable ache. He had saved money, forgoing vacations and unnecessary expenses, all with a single goal in mind: to close the gap between Phoenix and Portland, to finally begin the life he and Clara had spent countless hours designing in their conversations. He imagined them hiking in the forest she described, cooking the healthy meals from her posts in her kitchen, falling asleep to the real sound of the ocean waves instead of a white noise app on his phone. One evening, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves, he told her, "I've done it," he said, his voice bright with triumph. "I've bought a plane ticket. I'm coming to Portland. The first week of June. On the other end of the line, there was a sudden, profound silence. It was not a happy, stunned silence. It was a dead, hollow void. For a moment, Liam thought the call had dropped. "Clara? Did you hear me?" Her voice, when it finally came, was thin and strained. You bought a ticket." "Yes. Isn't it amazing? We can stop talking about someday and make it next month." His excitement was so immense. He initially missed the sheer panic lacing her words. "Liam, it's not a good time," she stammered. "I have this huge project at work, a fitness retreat I have to organize. I'll be completely swamped." The excuse was flimsy, and for the first time, a real sharp pang of doubt pierced through his optimism. "A retreat? You've never mentioned a retreat. You can't take a couple of days off? After 2 years, Clara? I just want to see you." The panic in her voice escalated. A torrent of excuses followed. A family member was sick. Her landlord was doing renovations on her cottage. She might have to travel unexpectedly. Each excuse was more frantic and less believable than the last. For Clara, his announcement was a death knell for her fantasy. The walls she had so carefully constructed around her lie were crumbling, and the reality she had spent years hiding was about to be exposed. The man she loved was coming to meet a woman who didn't exist, and she had nowhere left to run. Liam's joy curdled into confusion, then hurt. "What is going on?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "If you don't want me to come, just tell me. Is there someone else? Are you having second thoughts about us?" "No. No, it's not that, I swear," she cried, and he could hear the genuine desperation in her voice, a desperation he misinterpreted as fear of losing him. He softened. "Then what is it? Whatever it is, we can face it together. Let me be there for you. You don't have to go through anything alone." His words, intended as the ultimate comfort, were her ultimate terror. Facing it together was the one thing they could not do. Finally, cornered and exhausted from the lie, she broke. A choked sob came through the phone. "Okay," she whispered, the words sounding like a surrender. "Okay, you can come." A wave of relief washed over Liam, so powerful it erased the preceding anxiety. He had broken through. She was just scared, he told himself. Scared of the intensity of it all, of finally making it real. He spent the next few weeks in a fever of happy anticipation, planning every detail of their first meeting. He imagined the restaurants they would go to, the trails they would walk. He bought a new shirt. He got a haircut. He was preparing to meet the love of his life. Clara, meanwhile, spent those same weeks in a state of quiet dread. The lie had run its course. There were no more exits, no more delays. She cycled through 1,000 impossible scenarios, running away, faking her own death, before landing on the only option she had left: the truth. She couldn't bring herself to tell him over the phone, to hear the love in his voice turn to disgust or pity. She had to let him see it. She had to face him, to let the image he held of her shatter against the harsh reality of who she was. She gave him the date, the flight number, and a meeting spot at the airport. She knew that in doing so, she was setting a timer on the end of her world, and on the beginning of his heartbreak. The scene at the airport replays in his mind, not as a memory, but as a recurring trauma, each detail etched with acid. The hopeful anticipation that had buoyed him for weeks now felt like a naive, foolish dream. He remembers the texture of the marigold's petals, soft and velvety, a fragile piece of life in his nervous grip. He remembers the exact shade of blue in the shirt he'd chosen so carefully that morning, wanting to look his best for her. He remembers the low hum of the baggage carousel, a monotonous, circular sound that mimicked the looping thoughts in his head. Where is she? What will she be like? Will she like me? When she approached, his first instinct was one of social awkwardness. He thought she needed help, or that she had mistaken him for a relative she was meant to be meeting. He remembers the precise way the fluorescent lights reflected off the metal of her wheelchair, a cold, clinical gleam. He had prepared himself for 100 different scenarios for their first meeting. A shy smile, an enthusiastic hug, perhaps even a kiss right there in the middle of the terminal. He had not prepared for this. When she spoke his name, the sound of her voice, that beloved, familiar voice, coming from the stranger's mouth, was a profound cognitive dissonance. It was as if his brain was short-circuiting, unable to reconcile two completely contradictory sets of data. The audio did not match the video. The soul he knew did not match the body he saw. For a split second, he entertained wild, irrational theories. Was this a prank? A cruel joke? Was Serafina standing somewhere nearby, watching this unfold? "Liam? It's me," she said again, her voice trembling. "It's Clara." He stared at her, his mind frantically trying to find a single point of reference. He searched her face for any trace of the woman from the photographs. The bone structure was different, the shape of the mouth, the line of the jaw. It was all wrong. And then he saw it. Her eyes, behind the pain and the fear, they were the same deep, expressive brown eyes he had seen in a few carefully cropped, close-up photos she had claimed were her no-makeup, lazy day pictures. At the time, he'd found them endearing, a sign of her willingness to be unglamorous with him. Now, he realized they were the only truthful part of her image she had ever shared. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. It was a denial of physics, of the evidence right in front of him. "You're not. Who are you?" "I am Clara," she repeated, tears now streaming down her pale cheeks. "Serafina, she isn't real. The photos, the life, it's not me." "I'm so sorry, Liam." The confession hung in the air between them, a toxic, invisible cloud. "She isn't real." The words echoed in the silent, screaming space in his head. 2 years of his life, of his emotions, of his hopes, had been dedicated to a work of fiction. The love he felt, which had been the most real and powerful force in his life, was suddenly homeless, directed at a ghost. The betrayal was so absolute, it was disorienting. It wasn't just that she had lied. It was that the entire foundation of their shared reality was a lie. He had not been deceived about a detail. He had been deceived about a person's entire existence. A hot, bitter wave of adrenaline surged through him. It was not just anger. It was a cocktail of humiliation, grief, and profound violation. He felt like the world's biggest fool. Every late-night conversation, every whispered, "I love you," every plan for the future flashed through his mind. All of it now recontextualized as a scene in which he was the unwitting, pathetic mark. "Why?" he managed to choke out, the word raw with pain. "I was afraid," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I wanted you to know me, the real me on the inside." Without this, she gestured vaguely at her body, at the wheelchair. But her explanation couldn't penetrate the wall of his shock and hurt. He couldn't process her motives, her pain. All he could feel was his own. He looked at her, this stranger who held all his secrets, and felt nothing but a cold, vast emptiness. The woman he loved had just died, and her murderer was sitting right in front of him. He turned without another word and walked away, leaving her there with the fallen desert marigold on the floor between them, a withered symbol of a love that had never been real. Liam walked out of the airport and into the unfamiliar drizzle of a Portland afternoon. The cool, damp air was a shock after the dry heat of Phoenix, and it felt like a physical manifestation of the cold dread that had settled deep in his bones. He didn't know where he was going. He just walked, his suitcase trailing behind him like a dead weight. The rhythmic click of its wheels on the wet pavement, a maddeningly steady beat in a world that had lost all rhythm. He was on autopilot, his mind a maelstrom of shock and denial. He found a generic airport hotel, checked in with a blank expression, and rode the elevator up to his room. He didn't turn on the lights. He let his suitcase fall to the floor and sat on the edge of the bed in the gray, dim light filtering through the window. The room was anonymous, sterile, and utterly silent. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact photo, a picture of Serafina smiling on a beach at sunset. His finger trembled as he tapped open her Instagram profile. He scrolled through the images one by one. There she was hiking a mountain. There she was lifting a heavy barbell. There she was, laughing with friends whose faces were blurred. It was a museum of lies. Each photo was a dagger. The vibrant, healthy body, the sun-kissed skin, the life of effortless vitality. It was all a costume, a mask worn by the frail, sick woman in the wheelchair. He felt a wave of nausea. He switched to their text messages, scrolling back through months, then years of conversations. Thousands upon thousands of words. He saw his own vulnerability laid bare. His hopes, his declarations of love, his detailed plans for their future. And he saw her responses, now sinister and manipulative in this new, harsh light. Every "I love you" she had typed felt like a calculated deception. Every shared dream felt like a hook she had used to keep him tethered to her fantasy. He was not a partner in a relationship. He was an audience for a one-woman show. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a hot flush of shame that spread from his chest to his face. Finally, he did the only thing he could think to do. He called his sister. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful. "Hey, you landed. How is it? Have you seen her yet?" A strangled, guttural sound escaped Liam's throat. He couldn't form words. He could only make a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. Sarah's tone shifted instantly from cheerful to alarmed. "Liam? What's wrong? What happened?" He finally managed to push the words past the lump in his throat, his voice cracking. "You were right," he whispered. "You were right about everything." He didn't need to explain further. She understood immediately. The rest of the call was a blur of his choked, incoherent sobs and her quiet, steady voice on the other end of the line, not saying "I told you so," but just being there, a lifeline of reality in his sea of illusion. Meanwhile, back in Portland, Clara made the long, lonely journey home. The trip from the airport, which required a specialized shuttle service, was a slow, humiliating ordeal. She felt the stares of other passengers, their gazes a mixture of pity and impatience. When she finally got back to her small, dark apartment, the silence was deafening. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation at the airport drained away, leaving behind a crushing, bone-deep exhaustion. She had done it. She had told the truth, and it had destroyed everything. She navigated her wheelchair to her desk and opened her laptop. Her hands shook as she logged into the Serafina_Sunrise account one last time. She looked at the vibrant, smiling face of her avatar and felt a wave of self-loathing so intense it made her dizzy. This beautiful, strong, fictional woman had ruined the only good thing in her life. With a few clicks, she went through the deactivation process. A prompt asked, "Are you sure you want to permanently delete your account?" She clicked yes without hesitation. The screen refreshed and a simple message appeared. "Your account has been removed," just like that. Serafina vanished. The 50,000 followers, the years of posts, the entire fabricated world gone. All that was left was Clara, alone in her dimly lit room, with nothing but the truth and the pain it had caused. For 3 days, Liam remained in his hotel room, a self-imposed prison. He ordered room service he barely touched and stared at the television without seeing it. His mind was a relentless loop, replaying every conversation, every promise, every photo, searching for the exact moment he should have known. The red flags, once dismissed as quirks, now blazed like warning signals. The broken camera, the inconsistent stories, the sudden bouts of melancholy. He had explained them all away, constructing a narrative that fit his own desperate need for the fantasy to be real. He was complicit in his own deception, and that realization was a bitter pill to swallow. On the 4th day, an email arrived. The sender was an address he didn't recognize, but the subject line was simply his name, Liam. He opened it with a sense of dread. It was from Clara. The email was long, a sprawling, desperate confession that spilled onto the digital page in a torrent of anguish and regret. She told him everything, holding nothing back. She wrote about her diagnosis in her early 20s, just as her life was supposed to be starting. She described the slow, brutal theft of her mobility, her career, her social life. She detailed the crushing loneliness and the invisibility she felt, how people started looking through her, their eyes filled with a pity that felt like erasure. She explained how the Serafina profile began not as a deception, but as a sanctuary, a place where she could exist without the constant asterisk of her illness. It was a fantasy that nourished her, but she never intended for it to ensnare someone else. When he came into her life, she wrote, she was terrified. She fell in love with his kindness, his intelligence, his soul, and for the first time, she felt someone was falling in love with hers. The lie, she explained, was a desperate attempt to protect that connection, to keep him in her life. She thought that if she could make him love her mind enough, her spirit enough, then maybe, just maybe, when he finally saw her body, it wouldn't matter. "I know it was wrong," she wrote. "I know I destroyed your trust and broke your heart. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to be loved. I wanted, for just a little while, to feel what it was like to be the kind of woman someone like you could love. I am so sorry for the pain I caused. I will live with that regret for the rest of my life." Liam read the email 3 times. The first time, he felt a surge of white-hot anger at her justifications. Her pain did not give her the right to inflict it on him. The second time, a sliver of bitter, unwanted empathy crept in. He could intellectually understand the depth of her desperation, the profound loneliness that would drive a person to such extremes. He could see the tragic figure behind the monstrous act. The third time he read it, he felt only a profound, hollow sadness. He understood the why, but it didn't change the what. The truth was, he hadn't fallen in love only with her mind. He had fallen in love with the entire package. The mind, the spirit, and the body she had presented. He had fallen for the image of strength, for the promise of a life of shared physical adventures. He had dreamed of hiking with her, running with her, traveling with her. Her physical being, her vitality, was not an incidental detail. It was a core component of the person he loved and the future he envisioned. To pretend otherwise would be a lie to himself. He realized he had been in love with an idea, a carefully constructed ideal that perfectly mirrored his own needs and desires. He was mourning a ghost, and her confession, while explaining the ghost's origins, couldn't bring it back to life. He deleted the email and booked the first flight back to Phoenix. Returning to the blazing sun and familiar landscapes of Arizona did not feel like coming home. Felt like arriving in a foreign country. The vibrant colors of his own meticulously tended garden seemed garish and mocking. The relentless sunshine felt oppressive. The world that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a stage set, and he was an actor who had forgotten all his lines. He moved through his days in a fog of disbelief. At work, he struggled to focus, staring at blueprints for gardens that were supposed to be oases of peace, feeling nothing but a dull, empty ache. He was a changed man. The easy optimism that had been a core part of his personality was gone, replaced by a brittle, guarded cynicism. He found himself suspicious of everyone. A friendly smile from a barista seemed calculated. A kind word from a neighbor felt like it had a hidden motive. The world, which he had once seen as a place of potential connection, now seemed rife with deception. His trust in his own judgment was shattered. If he could be so wrong about something so fundamental, how could he ever trust himself again? His sister, Sarah, became his reluctant anchor. He would go to her apartment and just sit in silence while she cooked or read, grateful for a presence that demanded nothing from him. She listened when he needed to talk, letting him rage one moment and weep the next. It was during one of these evenings that she gently suggested he see a therapist. "This isn't just a breakup, Liam," she said, her voice soft. "This is a different kind of trauma. It's a violation. You need to talk to someone who understands that." He resisted at first, but the psychological weight of the experience was too heavy to bear alone. The therapy sessions were grueling. He had to untangle the web of his own feelings, separating the genuine emotions he had felt from the fictional context in which they had existed. Was his love for Clara real, even if she wasn't? Could he grieve a person who had never lived? The therapist called it ambiguous loss, a grief for something that was lost but had never truly been present. It was the erasure of a reality he had inhabited for 2 years. He had to mourn not just a future, but a past that he now understood was a lie. The digital world became a minefield. The sight of an Instagram post, the ping of a notification. It all triggered a fresh wave of anxiety and pain. He deleted all his social media apps, severing his ties to the world that had been the source of both his greatest joy and his deepest wound. He began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding his life, not on a foundation of digital hope, but on the solid, tangible ground of reality. We get one final, brief glimpse of Clara. She is in her apartment, the ever-present twilight casting long shadows. She is writing in a journal the old-fashioned way with a pen on paper. She is no longer writing as Serafina. She is writing as Clara. She writes about her pain, her body, her loneliness. She writes about the man from Arizona whose heart she broke. There is no easy resolution for her. There is no miraculous recovery or sudden absolution. There is only the quiet, daily struggle of living with the consequences of her actions, of trying to find a way to exist as herself, in her own reality, without the beautiful, destructive armor of a lie. Her story is not one of a villain, but a tragedy of human frailty, of a desperate hunger for connection in a world that often rewards illusion over truth. And so we are left with the wreckage. A man in Arizona, a woman in Oregon, and the 1,000-mile-wide chasm of a lie that connected and ultimately destroyed them. Their story is more than just a bizarre anecdote of the digital age. It is a profound and painful illustration of the invisible forces that shape our lives in a world mediated by screens. It forces us to ask ourselves a deeply uncomfortable question. In our own lives, online and off, where do we draw the line between curation and deception? We all present a carefully selected version of ourselves to the world. We use filters to smooth our skin. We post pictures from our best days. We craft captions that project an image of happiness, success, and fulfillment. We trim the messy, inconvenient, and painful parts of our lives from the public narrative. This is, to some extent, a normal and human thing to do. But where does it stop? At what point does the curated self become a false self? At what point does the omission of unflattering details become a lie that can cause real, tangible harm to another human being? The antagonist in this story was not truly Clara. She was a product of her circumstances, a desperate soul driven to extreme measures by pain, shame, and a loneliness so profound that the fantasy of connection was preferable to the reality of isolation. The true antagonistic force is the invisible threat of our modern condition. It is the societal pressure to be perfect, to be strong, to be perpetually happy. It is the way technology allows us to create avatars that are more appealing than our authentic selves. And it is the deep, primal human loneliness that makes us both vulnerable to believing in fantasies and, sometimes, desperate enough to create them. Liam's vulnerability was not a weakness. It was a sign of his humanity. He was a hopeful seeker, a man who wanted to believe in the good, in the possibility of a profound connection. He opened his heart completely, and for that he was punished. His journey back to himself is not about becoming cynical or closing himself off forever. It is about learning to ground his hope in reality, to seek connection not in polished perfection, but in the flawed, messy, and authentic truth of another person. It is a lesson learned at a devastating cost. And what of Clara? Her story serves as a tragic reminder that the lies we tell, especially those born of our deepest insecurities, ultimately imprison us. Her digital world was a cage gilded with the admiration of strangers, and it prevented her from any chance at a real, honest connection, however difficult that might be. By hiding the part of herself she was most ashamed of, she ensured that no one could ever truly love her, because no one was ever given the chance to truly know her. Her greatest fear was being rejected for her illness, and in trying to avoid that rejection, she orchestrated a far greater one, a rejection not just of her body, but of her entire deception. This story asks you, the person listening, to look at your own digital life, at your own relationships. It asks you to consider the avatars you encounter and the one you, yourself, project. It is a cautionary tale that implores us to lead with empathy, but to protect ourselves with a healthy dose of reality. It reminds us that behind every profile, behind every perfectly framed photo and witty caption, There is a human being with their own fears, their own pains, and their own desperate need to be seen. In the end, we see Liam, months later, standing in the Phoenix desert as the sun begins to set. The sky is a riot of color, a spectacle of impossible beauty. He is alone, but the silence around him is no longer heavy with loneliness. It is a peaceful, contemplative silence. He crouches down and touches the soil, the warm, real, gritty earth. He is replanting his own garden, finding his way back to the tangible, the authentic. The scars of his experience will remain, a permanent reminder of the ghost he once loved. But he is healing, learning to find solace not in a distant, digital sunrise, but in the real, imperfect, and breathtaking beauty of the world right in front of him. The question is left for us to answer. In a world that encourages us to filter our reality, what does it take to truly see another person? And what, in the end, are we willing to risk to be truly seen ourselves?